Hello NASDAQ followers, and welcome back to another edition of Behind the Bell. Joining me today right before PR Week rings the closing bell at 3:50 p.m. is Steve Barrett, Editorial Director at PR Week. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting us in.
So you're here on the heels of the next PRWeek Awards ceremony on March 21st. That's tomorrow night. Could you tell us a little bit about who will be awarded at the ceremony?
Yeah, so PRWeek Awards are pretty much the Oscars of the PR industry, and it's a really big year for us this year because it's our 20th anniversary awards. We started 20 years ago last year, but this is our 20th awards, so it's a really big night. We've got some special awards. We're honoring some really big names in PR. I can't tell you who they are because that would be spoiling the surprise on the night, but all the big PR companies will be there. On the agency side, people like Edelman, Weber Shandwick, Ketchum, We Communications, all these companies, Fleischmann Hillard, and then all the client side people as well. So every company now realizes the importance of communications and PR and has a strong in-house team. So from Bayer through to GM through to Nike, every company, Miller Coors and Budweiser, we've seen those sort of fun and games with their sparring and social media. That all involves the communications teams. And then you have a bunch of vendors that support and provide services to those companies like Cision, the wire services, even NASDAQ actually, to be honest. Then you've got the education part of it. So the next generation, we honor students and education programs who are bringing up the next generation of PR professionals.
Now, and this is a huge event, like you said, all of these powerful names in PR and communications in one room. I would love some insight into your brain, into all the knowledge that you have in terms of messaging, because I can imagine how much it's changed in the last 10 years. What are some of the trends that you've noticed this year?
Yeah, well, looking back 10 years, I think the biggest change is social media. You know, we've all seen that in the media and in communications and in business generally. It's just made everything so much more immediate. I remember speaking to Jay Carney, who used to be the White House press secretary, and he's now the head of communications at Amazon. And he said when he was White House press secretary, you know, back in the day, that job involved kind of working through the day, doing your communications, waiting for the evening news at 5:45, having a cocktail, and then going home. Whereas the job he was doing, really, it was 24/7. He lived on the White House site. He would go back and see his family for a couple of hours and then get back to work. And that's what's the biggest change, 24/7 global communications and the speed that brings with it. You know, I was flying back from London the other day and I bought a newspaper at Heathrow Airport on the Sunday, and there was sports results from the day before that weren't in the paper because it printed too late to include them. And that just sort of is an illustration of the way media has changed and the way newspapers have got print newspapers and magazines have got a different role now. They're kind of the analysis, the deep dive, the place of record, but the actual news and the fast moving stuff, that's all online. Cell phones have changed the game, smartphones.
Absolutely.
You know, 35% of our traffic and rising comes from smartphones. We get a lot of traffic through social media as well, LinkedIn, Twitter. Even Facebook, you know, that's become a business environment. So I would say those are the biggest changes in the 10 years. In terms of current trends, we were talking earlier about Davos, you know, a big collecting point for business and governments, politicians, non-profits. And, you know, people are a bit cynical about Davos, and maybe rightly so. You know, there's a lot of great talk done there, and a lot of people, when they get back to their offices, you know, it's back to business as usual. But one of the big themes there was purpose and companies acting with purpose. So especially young people now, when they buy a brand or they interact with a brand, or even when they go and choose where to work, they want to know what that company stands for, what that brand stands for. So that's all about companies have got to communicate that. And that's been a big role for the PR professionals. And I think the other big change in the last 10 years is that the C-suite executives really understand the value of PR a lot more. So it's not just like, go and write a press release about this thing we're doing. The PR professionals are now involved in making the decisions about where the business goes, or the strategy, etc. And they're dovetailing with marketing a lot more. So it's a really exciting, fast-moving world. But as we've seen on social, there's also a lot of potential for crisis communications. You need to have crisis plans in place because we've all seen things blow up on social in minutes.
Absolutely.
You've got to
it
be
all
ready.
moves so much faster too, so you need to be ready to have that emergency plan.
Well, look at the Super Bowl. There was the ad about the corn syrup that Budweiser put out. And and the National Corn Growers Association, the head of communications, was watching the Super Bowl thinking he was going to have a nice night watching the game. And all of a sudden he's like, wow, okay, we've got to respond. And they activated their team, got together and tweeted something out to just sort of make their position clear. And then the story kind of played out over that week with Miller Coors, because Budweiser was criticizing Miller Coors. And that battle's still going on. It's a really interesting case study, actually, and that involves PR professionals, real-time marketing, social media strategies. So it's a fascinating time, but it's a great opportunity because you can talk to your consumers, your stakeholders, and engage with them a lot more, but it's also quite dangerous as well. So exciting but frightening, I like to put it.
Absolutely. And I mean, a theme threading throughout all of these trends is adaptability. You know, you either have to adapt or, I mean, as you said, the print newspapers need to find their role in deep dive analysis. So in terms of adaptability, are there any companies that you would point to that you think have done it quite well?
Yeah, that's a good point, because if you look at some of the mainstream retailers of the old days, like Sears, they didn't adapt, and they kind of died. You know, Blockbuster didn't adapt, so we've got Netflix. So I think if you look at companies, if you look at media companies, I think the New York Times has done a great job. They've paid for content is now becoming more accepted, whereas everybody used to expect everything for free online, and they've adapted and got a good paid for following now, and they're very much online focused. I think talking about media, I think you no longer think in terms of print first, for example. We still do a print edition, but that's not our starting point. And the New York Times, the newspaper, is not its starting point. You know, they're doing great content, and then they're activating it in the right way possible for each platform. And convening audiences as well.
Yeah, they've done some work. I think they were also working on some augmented reality or virtual reality kind of initiatives in terms of reporting.
They have, and there's a great report they put out a couple of years ago about the future of journalism, which is well worth a read. And the other thing they've got is I'm doing an ad for the New York Times here, but they have a custom content studio called T-Brand Studio, as do most media owners now. So do we. We call it Haymarket Studio. Does custom activations for our clients, and that has become partner content has become a big thing. And it's no longer just an advertorial that is really sort of a press release that's printed in a magazine. This is real partnership stuff, and it's great content, you know, and it allows media owners to create great content.
Absolutely. Now, something else that you mentioned is the need for C-level executives to be involved. I mean, now we see C-level executives step up to the plate and really hear about what they think is important, and really they get to put their values front and center as well with all of the decisions that the company makes. So for C-level executives who are trying to still adapt and trying to put their thinking or their way of thinking out there, what are some of the first steps that you see people take?
Yeah, it's interesting because not every CEO is an Elon Musk, or maybe some people would say that's a good thing, but or T-Mobile, or someone who's naturally a great communicator. And at the end of the day, the CEOs are the first line of communications, and they are they are telling their brand stories. So I think most C-suite execs now have had to up their game a little bit and not just get media training, but just get more comfortable with it. So, but they recognize the value of it, and they recognize that they can talk directly to their customers, consumers, and most importantly, their staffers. Internal communications is really important. It's the first line of external. If you can have your employees on your side, then they can help tell that story externally. So, if something breaks on social about an issue or a company, your staffers can come in and maybe defend, and then that's much more authentic than something coming out of the PR department or coming out of the official company channel. So they're using all those tools and tactics, but I think they just recognize that they have to place communications high on their agenda, because we've seen with President Trump, whether you love him or hate him, he's a very effective communicating his messages, especially to his core audience, directly, with no sort of third-party filter. through the media. So we've seen that power, and brands can tap into that as well by doing their own content. So, we're seeing companies like Unilever with their Dove campaigns, or building their own brand content, and employing a lot of journalists to do that. And that's another way they can communicate.
Absolutely, and definitely cuts out the middlemen being able to commute directly.
Yeah, it's a bit for us. It's a little bit dangerous. We've all seen the amount of journalists has shrunk significantly, and I find that sad because I'm a journalist. But that's the reality of it. I didn't mention influencers earlier. Third-party influencers. So they also have a big part to play now, as long as they're authentic and transparent about what they're doing. We all saw what happened with the Fire Festival. That was the bad side of influence. But if Kim Kardashian tweets about your product, you see an immediate massive bump in sales, and that's why influencers like her, and more niche specialist influencers, can really be effective ways to communicate messages as well.
Right on the money with that, on influencer power. For better, it can be used for both better or worse.
Well, we've seen the bad side of it.
Yep.
With the extremism, and that's something that social media platforms like Facebook have really got to take seriously and do a better job at policing that, because they are, at the end of the day, media platforms, and they need to act in the way that media owners have had to act over the years and take responsibility for what is on that platform, right? You can't just have anything on there willy-nilly, and they need to do a better job of that.
Absolutely. All things to take into consideration, especially tomorrow night, as we take a look at some of the best performers and some of the companies doing very innovative work in the PR and communications world.
Yeah, I'm really excited by this year's entries. I've been doing this job 9 years, and this is the best crop of work I've ever seen, the most high-quality shortlisted work from all sorts of brands, whether it's Budweiser, IBM, Bayer. They're all in there, and all sorts of categories as well: automotive, GM, pharma, and there's some brilliant work on display. Everyone that's shortlisted is great work, but we've got the tough job of picking those winners, and they'll be unveiled tomorrow. And we're very excited to see that, and you can check out all the winners on PRWeek.com, and on late Thursday night at the end of the ceremony.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing all that work, seeing all those winners and all those names. Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.